Jamaica proudly proclaims its national motto, "Out of many, one people," a tribute to the island's multiracial heritage. This little Caribbean nation with about 2.8 million people is indeed a cultural blender. Roughly 76.3% of Jamaicans are of predominantly African descent, with about 15.1% Afro-European, 3.4% Indian or Afro-Indian, 3.2% Caucasian, 1.2% Chinese, and the remaining 0.8% from other groups. In other words, around 3/4 of Jamaicans trace their roots to Africa, while sizable minorities come from various immigrant communities. Despite being a small country, Jamaica's diversity is enormous. A 2024 estimate notes that these minority groups, Chinese, Lebanese, Syrian, Indian, mixed race, and white Jamaicans, together about 10% of the population, control over 60% of the nation's wealth. We'll explore each of these groups, their arrival in Jamaica, and the rich cultural gifts they have given, from music and food to language and faith, that helped make Jamaica the island we know today. 76.3% African Jamaicans, the heartbeat of the island. The vast majority of Jamaicans are of African ancestry. This begins with the slave trade, starting in the 16th century under the Spanish, and exploding after the English took Jamaica in 1655. Millions of West and Central Africans were brought forcibly to work on sugar plantations. These enslaved people endured brutal conditions, but they preserved threads of their languages, beliefs, and rhythms. After the British outlawed slavery, with abolition in 1834, many Africans and their descendants remained the backbone of Jamaican society. Today, their influence is everywhere. Jamaican patois, the Creole language spoken by nearly everyone, is rooted largely in West African grammar and idioms mixed with English, with touches of Irish, Spanish, and other tongues. As Professor Vereen Shepherd, a UWI cultural scholar, notes, patois is a language by itself, a part of their culture, their right to speak their indigenous language. In other words, Jamaican patois is living history, an African-influenced voice that every Jamaican can claim. Africans also contributed the rhythms and spiritual spark of Jamaican music. Reggae, ska, rocksteady, and dancehall all trace deep roots to African musical traditions, like drumming, call and response vocals, and dance, blended with European instruments. The island's greatest global musical export, Bob Marley, who was of mixed African and European ancestry himself, turned reggae into an international language of freedom and unity. As Marley's biography notes, he increased the visibility of Jamaican music worldwide and became a global figure in popular culture, known as a Rastafarian icon. His songs and spiritual message, along with later reggae and dancehall stars, carry African-inspired themes of social justice, Yoruba, and Christian syncretic faith and unity. Even Jamaican Rastafarianism reflects African heritage. It grew from Pan-African ideas, inspired by Jamaican-born Marcus Garvey and Ethiopian religious imagery, and uses ganja or cannabis as a sacrament, a practice that itself came from Indian immigrants. In daily life, African traditions remain strong in religion, folklore, and celebrations. Many Jamaicans still practice Spiritism, Obeah, or revival churches, all blending African ritual with Christianity. Traditional festivals like Yonkanu, which are masquerade parades at Christmas, preserve African masquerade traditions. Cuisine is another deep African legacy. Dishes like ackee and saltfish, which is Jamaica's national dish, trace ingredients back to West Africa. The ackee fruit came from Ghana, and saltfish cooking traditions resemble Ghanaian fish stews. Popular street foods like bami, which is cassava flatbread, and bulla cakes also echo African diets. Moreover, spice blends for jerk cooking. Jamaica's famous spicy barbecue style have roots in the Maroon, or runaway slave, communities of the interior who adapted African seasoning methods. Today, the African-Jamaican identity is vibrant and dominant. Most Jamaicans identify as Black and celebrate African-inspired culture as their own. This cultural pride was hard-won, as early census data show Europeans once heavily outnumbered Africans. For example, in 1662, whites were 87% of the population. But by 1734, blacks had become the clear majority, with whites under 10%. the descendants of the enslaved and of Maroons, freedom fighters like Queen Nanny of the Maroons, shaped modern Jamaica through resilience and creativity. As Vereen Shepherd argues, Jamaican culture today reflects the society's beliefs, ideas, and values of this diverse people. And that culture is rooted deeply in those African-origin Jamaicans who make up 3/4 of the nation. 15.1% Afro-European, mixed Jamaicans, bridging heritage. Next come Jamaicans of mixed African-European heritage, about 15.1% of the population. Historically known as colored or mulatto, and today often called brown Jamaicans, these communities arose in colonial times when African slaves and European settlers intermarried or had children. In the early colonial period, this group sometimes enjoyed more privileges than enslaved people. Some were free artisans or overseers, but after emancipation, they also faced color-based prejudice. Over time, many mixed ancestry Jamaicans assimilated with the black majority, but a distinct brown identity persisted. Culturally, mixed Jamaicans have often served as bridges between heritage. They carried on African traditions and introduced European customs in equal measure. For example, they helped spread Christianity, like Anglican and Baptist churches, to African descendants, while also keeping African-rooted music alive. In politics and society, several of Jamaica's leaders and artists have had Afro-European ancestry, reflecting the island's complex heritage. For instance, the first Prime Minister, Alexander Bustamante, had Irish and African roots. In modern times, the term Afro-European simply reflects how common mixed ancestry is. About 18.3% of Jamaicans are European or mixed Afro-European by one estimate. Although often not emphasized, Afro-European Jamaicans contribute to culture and economy as well. Many of Jamaica's business and professional families are mixed. According to demographic studies, white, Chinese, Lebanese, Syrian, and mixed-race Jamaicans, though under 25% of the population, control a majority of Jamaica's wealth. This is a legacy of colonial class divides, where lighter-skinned Jamaicans held more property. Today, those ties to Europe are seen in architecture like Georgian buildings and British-style churches, the prevalence of English as the official language, and in institutions such as schools and legal traditions inherited from Britain. Yet practically speaking, there is no clear separation. Most mixed Jamaicans identify simply as Jamaican and freely share in all aspects of popular culture. In fact, Jamaica's vibrant scene, from dancehall music and carnival to cricket and athletics, is enjoyed by all Jamaicans regardless of ancestry. As one Jamaican writer puts it, brown is just one shade of Jamaican, adding to the color of the island's culture. About 3.4% of Jamaicans have South Asian roots. These are primarily descendants of Indian indentured laborers. Between 1845 and 1917, under British colonial rule, more than 36,000 workers arrived from India to Jamaica. Many came from northern India, like Bhojpur and Awadh, and some from South India, to fill the labor shortage after slavery ended. The first Indians arrived in 1845, and migration continued until World War I. Compared to freed African slaves, Indian laborers were often paid less and separated socially, so they built their own communities, preserving Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh faiths. About 2/3 of those Indian workers stayed permanently. Others eventually returned to India or migrated elsewhere. Cultural contributions. Despite being a small minority, Indo-Jamaicans have given Jamaica a rich addition of traditions. The most visible is food. Jamaican cuisine today famously includes curried dishes and flatbreads. Curries of goat, chicken, and vegetables, often served with rice and beans, owe their recipe to Indian cooks. The popular roti, a tortilla-like wrap filled with curried meats or vegetables, is a direct import from Indian roti breads. Pastries like follory, spiced split pea fritters, and dal bhat, dal with rice, are also part of Jamaica's food scene. Sweets such as bakes and tamarind balls have Asian cousins. Even the spicy green seasoning used for jerk and other dishes has parallels in Indian masalas. These culinary gifts are now considered part of Jamaican national cuisine. For instance, the government of Jamaica officially declared May 10th Indian Heritage Day in recognition of over 170 years since the first indentures. Indo-Jamaican entrepreneurs also run many famous bakery and roti shops. As one Indo-Jamaican historian notes, foods such as curry goat, Curry chicken, faluri, and roti are popular, and seen as part of the national cuisine. The Indian community in Jamaica has made significant contributions to the religious and social life of the island. They've constructed temples and mosques across the country, in places like Portland and Clarendon. These serve as hubs for keeping Hindu and Muslim festivals alive. For instance, Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights, is celebrated annually in Kingston and other cities. Another remarkable festival is Hosay, a Shia Muslim commemoration of Imam Hussein's martyrdom. Introduced by Indian Muslims in the 1850s, Hosay has evolved into a uniquely Jamaican event. Today, people of all faiths, including Christians and Rastafarians, join the colorful Hosay street parades in Clarendon. A July 2024 article in the Jamaica Gleaner describes Hosay as a living tapestry of faith that unites people from diverse backgrounds, perfectly illustrating Jamaica's shared heritage. In short, Indo-Jamaican culture has seamlessly woven itself into the national fabric. Dr. Vereen Shepherd highlights that Jamaican society is characterized by its many cultures working together, with the Indian legacy, encompassing food, music, and festivals, being an integral thread. In the modern landscape, very few Jamaicans speak Hindi or other Indian languages, yet Indian surnames like Prasad and Chattergoon are quite common. The genetic legacy is evident too. The cannabis plant, or ganja, which is central to Rastafari rituals, was actually introduced by Indians. They have traditionally used marijuana as a spiritual herb in Hindu and folk practices, and this tradition has blended into Rastafarianism. One source even notes that the Rastafarian spiritual use of ganja traces back to India. Indian Jamaicans fully participate in the broader cultural scene. You'll find them at reggae concerts just as readily as at steel band shows, reflecting the country's interwoven heritage. Only about 3.2% of Jamaicans identify as white, yet their ancestors have been on the island since 1494. Christopher Columbus, an Italian sailing for Spain, landed on Jamaica that year, and Spain ruled Jamaica for over 150 years. The Spanish governor Juan de Esquivel claimed the island for Spain, but they established few settlements beyond mining and sugar. When the British conquered Jamaica in 1655, they brought a huge influx of English planters and soldiers. Early British Jamaica was overwhelmingly white in 1662. Whites made up 87% of the population. However, the British also imported more African slaves than Spain had, rapidly shifting the demographics. By 1734, whites were under 10%, and their numbers declined further after emancipation, for example, only 0.77% in 1960. White Jamaicans, mostly of British descent, with some Irish and Scottish, built the plantation economy and colonial government systems. They introduced the English language, which became official English, and the Anglican Church, leading many Jamaicans to be Protestant due to this. They founded schools, courts, and parliaments following British models. Some of Jamaica's traditional street names and towns, such as Spanish Town, Port Royal, and Montego Bay's Fort, date back to European colonists. Even the famed Blue Mountain coffee industry was largely developed by European and French settlers in the 18th and 19th centuries. However, since independence, Jamaica has celebrated its Afro-Caribbean identity more than its European ties. White Jamaicans today often integrate fully into Jamaican society, many having intermarried, and most mixed heritage Jamaicans identify simply as Jamaican. Still, the legacy lives on. For example, Jamaica's legal and parliamentary systems are based on British common law. The Governor-General and until recently the Prime Minister are largely people of mixed or lighter backgrounds, and on the coast, guest houses and hotel architecture still echo colonial styles. One critical note. Historically, the white minority, along with other small elites, held disproportionate economic power. As recently as the late 20th century, scholars noted that wealth or economic power in Jamaica is disproportionately held by white Jamaicans, Chinese Jamaicans, Lebanese, Syrian Jamaicans, Indian Jamaicans, and mixed-race Jamaicans, even though together those groups were under 25% of the population. In other words, the colonial legacy includes an economic gap that persists. On the lighter side, some white Jamaicans have added to culture too. For example, Aloysius Arrow Roberts, author of Hot Hot Hot, is of Welsh-Jamaican descent and wrote a famous calypso, and theater director Basil Dawkins and author Victor Stafford Reid, who is mixed race, interpreted Jamaican history in novels. Today, white Jamaicans tend to keep a low profile in pop culture. Jamaica's stars are mostly Afro-European, but they continue family businesses, farming, notably in older estates, and tourism. A few still speak with an accent that sounds slightly British. In short, the white community is a topping on Jamaica's cultural burger, small in number, shaped by history, and adding some European flavor to the mix, but by far not the main ingredient. Roughly 1.2% of Jamaicans trace their roots to China. This dates mainly to the late 19th century. In 1854, the first group of Chinese laborers arrived in Jamaica as indentured workers. Over the next decades, several more waves came, mostly Hakka people from Guangdong province, to work on plantations after emancipation. Unlike the Indians, many Chinese migrants came independently, paying their own way, or left indenture early. By the early 1900s, tens of thousands of Chinese lived in Jamaica, often concentrated in towns and cities. Early livelihood. The Chinese faced cultural barriers in plantation work, and many did not want to work in cane all their lives. By the 1860s and 70s, enterprising Chinese had left the plantations and opened grocery stores known as Chinese shops everywhere across the island. These corner stores became vital to communities, selling food staples and offering credit. A Jamaican diaspora history site notes that Chinese grocers showed a significant degree of entrepreneurship. These allowed individuals in poorer neighborhoods to buy their everyday food necessities in their own neighborhoods. Over time, Chinese businessmen expanded into restaurants, laundromats, wholesale distribution, and other trades. By the mid-20th century, Chinese Jamaicans controlled most of the grocery trade. One source says they ran 90% of dry goods stores and 95% of supermarkets in Jamaica. Cultural contributions. Just as small as their population, Chinese Jamaicans' cultural mark punches above their weight. In food, they created sui mein, often called sui mein, a uniquely Jamaican Chinese noodle soup or stir-fry seasoned with shrimp, pork, and vegetables, and spiced with Jamaican hot pepper. It's typically eaten with a fork and spoon and topped with a Scotch bonnet sauce, a clever fusion of Cantonese chow mein with Caribbean heat. Chinese cakes and baked goods also entered local cuisine. Interestingly, many Chinese-owned patty shops, those flaky meat pies, emerged in the 20th century. So it's common in Jamaica to see a Chinese family running a famous patty or noodle eatery. Chinese influence even reached Jamaican music. The early music industry was heavily shaped by Chinese Jamaican entrepreneurs. For example, Vincent Randy Chin founded VP Records, a giant reggae label. Leslie Kong founded Beverly's Records, famous in the 60s, and Bunny Striker Lee, another Chinese Jamaican, produced ska and reggae hits. The band Byron Lee and the Dragonaires was led by Chinese Jamaican Byron Lee and became a national institution. As the Jamaicans.com history notes, Chinese entrepreneurs branched out into restaurants, laundromats, wholesale merchandising and music production, and were early music innovators. So, the next time you hear a ska tune or visit a Chinese Jamaican restaurant, you're sensing that heritage. Chinese Jamaicans also maintain some traditions. For instance, they celebrate Chinese New Year with lion dances and fireworks, a custom that Jamaican festivals now incorporate. The dragon dances often feature in Jamaica's annual cultural festival, and education is highly valued. Many Chinese families emphasize schooling, which partly explains why a Jamaican Ethnic Wealth Report notes high college completion rates among Chinese Jamaicans. Modern presence. In the 1970s and 80s, some Chinese Jamaicans emigrated to Canada or the US amid economic unrest. But since the 1990s, there's been a small wave of new Chinese immigrants from Hong Kong and Taiwan setting up businesses. Today, about 50,000 people in Jamaica have Chinese ancestry, according to the 2011 census. They remain a vibrant business community. Many corner groceries, supermarkets like large chains such as Superplus, laundries, and eateries are Chinese-owned. In popular culture, figures like sprinter Asafa Powell, who is of partial Chinese descent, remind us that being Chinese Jamaican can go hand in hand with all aspects of Jamaican life. In summary, the Chinese have been praised for their industry in Jamaica. They brought entrepreneurial energy and unique flavors, such as sui mein, soy sauces, and gambling games like China Poo, and in doing so, helped weave that chapter of out of many one people. The remaining 0.8% of Jamaicans come from a variety of small ethnic backgrounds. Some of the most notable are Lebanese and Syrian Jamaicans. From the 1880s into the early 20th century, Christian migrants from the Ottoman Empire, today's Lebanon and Syria, arrived in Jamaica, escaping persecution. They often went into the banana and retail trades. By credit and enterprise, they built a presence similar to the Chinese. Starting as street peddlers, many Lebanese and Syrian families opened dry goods shops and eventually larger stores. These Middle Eastern Jamaicans introduced beloved foods too. As one Lebanese Jamaican scholar recalls, dishes like Syrian bread, stuffed vine leaves, hummus, kibba, and tabbouleh became Jamaican favorites. Indeed, even today, shrimping around Kingston, you might find a Lebanese-run eatery selling shawarma or falafel staples that have found a home in Jamaican cuisine. Other tiny groups include Jamaican Jews, mainly Sephardic, some of whom came with the Spanish or shortly after, Portuguese from Madeira in the 19th century, and very recent arrivals, Koreans, Japanese, small African and Middle Eastern diasporas. For example, there is a centuries-old Jamaican Jewish community that built synagogues in places like Spanish Town. Although very small now, they contributed early merchants and sugar refiners. But overall, these others combined to less than 1%. Still, their presence is felt in niche ways. You may hear a Jewish surname at a cafe, or spot Shalom bumper stickers, or taste a kosher chicken shop's recipe. Interestingly, many of these minor communities, Lebanese, Chinese, Indians, whites, and mixed race, share a role in Jamaica's economy. As noted, a demographic study points out that these non-black minorities, though under 25% of the population, control about 60% of the country's wealth. That's why groups like Lebanese Jamaicans can be found in business and banking. The founding families of NCB Jamaica had Lebanese roots. And Chinese Jamaicans run supermarket chains, etc. It's a legacy of colonial class divides, but also shows how these communities, though small, became integral to trade and commerce. To be clear, Jamaica today is very integrated. Ethnic festivals, foods, and music cross boundaries. Jamaican pop culture often blends all influences. For instance, the island's carnival-style culture day, the Bacchanal Jamaica parades, features costumes and music that echo West African, Indian, tams and drums, and even Chinese dragon motifs from lion dance teams. Dancehall artists might sample Hindi words or Arabic beats in songs. Rastafarian dreadlocks and reggae go global, but they wear Rasta beads that resemble Indian Rudraksha seeds. Even cricket, a British sport, is beloved by Jamaicans of all backgrounds. Ultimately, as culture champion Vereen Shepherd observes, Jamaica's strength is its celebration of diversity. She argues that instead of rejecting elements of Jamaican heritage, children should be taught there is nothing wrong with their nation's language. It is part of their culture. In other words, every Jamaican, whether African descendant, brown, Indian, Chinese, or European, belongs to the whole story. Conclusion. Jamaica's ethnic makeup reads like a journey through history. The original Taino Indians, the first Jamaicans whose influence survives in names like Yalas, then Spanish and British colonizers, the massive influx of enslaved Africans, and waves of indentured and immigrant workers from India, China, Lebanon, Syria, and beyond. Each group left its mark. Afro-Jamaicans gave the island its language, music, and soul. Indian Jamaicans gave it spicy cuisine and festivals. Chinese Jamaicans gave it entrepreneurship and new flavors. Middle Eastern Jamaicans gave it new breads and businesses. And European Jamaicans gave it language, legal systems, and infrastructure, for better or worse. Today, whether it's the pulsating beat of dancehall, the aroma of curry goat, the colors of Jose floats, or the phrase "mide ya" in patois, you see Jamaica's mixed roots. It truly lives up to out of many one people, a nation where all these threads are woven into one vibrant cultural tapestry.